Uh, Last week was socialism and property, or versus property, basically. This week it's a little different. It's capitalism, property, and democracy. And when you think of each of these, they're all part of markets, right? Markets go back thousands of years. People go to a market to exchange something for something else. Sometimes money, sometimes, a sheep for a cow or whatever. It goes back a long way, right? Today, markets are shopping centers. They're the internet where we buy things routinely. So everything is kind of a market. Now, here's the good thing about markets. They are a test engine for you, and more than ever. You have the power, right? You have the internet. You can go research stuff, find out how people like things before you ever buy them. So markets are a powerful test tool that decide what stays in markets and what leaves, right? Because they fail, they aren't any good. So if you go back to capitalism, property, and democracy, they're all markets. Democracy, especially because it's voting on an irregular basis for somebody to lead. Property, because free exchange of property, and I'll come back to that in a minute, is what drives economy. And then capitalism. Capitalism is kind of a broader thing. I know we think of capitalism like Big Daddy Warbucks and a cigar giving money to his friends for their businesses or whoever. And although that might be a little true in certain places, it's really, people just don't give away money willy-nilly unless you're a politician. Banking is part of capitalism. Property is part of capitalism. Trade is part of capitalism. Regulation is part of capitalism. How government spends is part of capitalism. There's a whole bunch of things. In fact, there's a whole bunch of groups that define economic freedom, and they rate every country in the world. And the United States used to be right at the top. We've kind of gotten away from smart capitalism towards state capitalism, and it's not very effective. But at the end of the day, it's still a market. So what does it all mean? So let's go back to property for a second. When we think of property, I know we always generally think of land, and we've talked about this a little, right? But it's a whole bunch of other things, including, what we started with is ideas. Intellectual property are probably the most valuable property type there is. And when you're good at ideas, good things happen, right? But there's other things. So if you go back to a guy named John Locke in the 1700s, John said, hey, the first two things that might be important in terms of property is your labor and your body. Your body is, if you don't own your own body. And for thousands of years, people owned neither their own labor nor their body. The king or pope or whoever you worked for, some dictator, they owned you. Literally owned you, and your opportunity to own actual property was nil. There's no way. If you work a piece of the king's land, you're lucky to eat. It was terrible. But when you look at that, four basic types, there's other things. And where did they come from? Labor is natural. We all know we got to work to do something. Where did stocks come from, right? Did somebody write a book on capitalism and says, hey, you need to have stocks or you need to have trade that launched this, like Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto? No, it was invented as kind of an outcome of markets. If you have a market and you've got money, maybe you got a lot of it, keeping it on yourself is probably not a good thing. I think it was in 1100 the first bank in Italy opened because there was a need, right? Stocks, where did they come from? The first stock company was invented by the King of England and his buddies to open the Bay Colony or to pay for it. So these things holistically arrive as needs arrive. That's what capitalism does. It says there's a need. Guy over here goes, I can fix that. You put them together and things happen. So it's this evolutionary thing. Even better, so you think about the 1700s, and property was still very hard to come by, especially for a commoner. America became this magnet, not only for religious freedom, but it was millions of acres of property to be had by anybody that wanted them, had a strong back and an axe that could chop down trees, and a surveyor. George Washington started as a surveyor. You could go down, stake it out, and then take it down to the recorder and get a deed. Well, that deed created value. That land is capital, and now it can be leveraged in other ways, maybe to get more land or maybe to open a business or whatever. And it was this unique, absolutely unique situation throughout the world, still is, where property, the immense value of capital in property was unleashed and made this country amazingly great because anybody could own property. But they all work together. So you look at democracy, you look at property, and you look at capitalism, and they were these things in markets that just kept evolving. And there was more stuff and better stuff, and sometimes there was bad stuff that went away, but they were evolutionary in a sense. So it wasn't like being for or against capitalism or property or democracy. It was a market generating either better outcomes or sometimes worse that meant you're gone, right? And that's the difference between socialism and capitalism. This is kind of freeze it in place. We'll stick with what we got, and if it doesn't work, we'll just add more regulation, or we'll spend more money on something, whatever it is. It's not the way it works on the other side. Now, understandably, some things in capitalism would fix the challenges of socialism, right? When you think of markets, they're like science, right? There are places you go test things, you evaluate the outcomes, and you either try to get better or you ignore the outcomes and you go out of business. Well, the government just applied some of those seeds by setting objectives, right? Testing what they want to do, seeing if it worked, and then moving on either, wrong thing, or we can make this better. It doesn't do that. And a lot of times on the capitalist side, and this would be conservatives in general are very liberal economics, liberal economically. It sounds like a, what? Well, liberal economics is about freedom, right? When you look across the board at private enterprises or think tanks that do economic indexes of freedom, there's a bunch of them. And guess what? The people at the top of the list, they evaluate property, banking, trade, stock companies, regulation, governments, all kinds of stuff. And they rate you, and the people at the top of the list routinely are the people doing well. Now, we used to be right at the top. We're kind of falling down a little. We need to do a better job of smart, wise, and simple regulation. We're not really doing that. So the capital kind of, guys that say they're capitalists, they don't do a great job, but they do a way better job than the guy on the socialist side. So is it capitalism versus property? No, they're all markets. They work together. It's a collaborative, evolving effort by all of us. Because here's the important one, we all get to vote. Capitalism and democracy line up because it's about voting. And we vote every day. We vote for a Ford over a Chevy. We vote for one house over another house. We vote for one kind of corn over another kind of corn. We're voting all the time. And that's what makes capitalism the engine, along with property, for success. Anyway, I'm Tom. I'll talk to you soon.